They laughed when he let ducks into his wheat. Those ducks killed every pest and fed his soil. The first duck went into the field on a Monday. That was how the trouble started. It was the 4th of April, 1983, a cold gray morning near Walla Walla, Washington, and Raymond Toller carried the crate out to the edge of his wheat himself. He was 61 years old, had farmed the same 320 acres in the Toshe Valley since he came home from Korea in 1954. He opened the crate. 42 ducks walked into his winter wheat. The neighbors found out by Thursday. Raymond had not asked anyone's opinion. He had bought the ducks from a hatchery outside Pendleton. Khaki Campbells, mostly, a breed that ran lean and walked far, and ate from sunup to dark. The hatchery man had asked what he wanted them for. Raymond said weed control. The man laughed, said he'd never heard of it. Sold him the ducks anyway. $1.85 a duckling, day old, 42 of them. 77.70 cents plus the crates. He'd driven the 60 miles to Pendleton in the dark to be there when the hatchery opened. Came home with a crate of ducklings peeping on the truck seat beside him. The cab smelling of straw and warm bird. Margaret met him at the door and looked at the crate and looked at him. 40 years married. She'd watched him try a great many things on that ground. Some had worked. She didn't say anything about the ducks. Put a pot of coffee on instead, which was her way of saying she'd wait and see. The wheat was already up, 6 inches of green in early April, and the wheat had a problem. The problem had a name. Cereal leaf beetle. It had come into the Toshe Valley 2 seasons back, and Raymond had watched it strip the flag leaves off his crop both years. The beetle larvae fed on the leaf tissue, left the blades silver and skeletal. A bad infestation could take 20% of the yield. Raymond had lost closer to 15 the year before. On 320 acres of soft white wheat, 15% was real money. The flag leaf was the part that mattered. On wheat, the topmost leaf does most of the work of filling the grain. The beetle larvae knew it. They fed on the flag leaf first, the youngest tissue, scraping it down to a skeleton of veins. A field of silvered flag leaves was a field that would head out light. Raymond had walked his crop the 2 springs before and seen it coming and had no answer for it but the sprayer. The sprayer worked. It also cost, and it killed everything, the beetle and whatever ate the beetle both, so that next spring the beetle came back to a field with nothing left to hold it in check. The county extension man had a solution. The solution was a sprayer. His name was Gerald Pruitt, extension agent for Walla Walla County for 9 years. Pruitt came out in March of 1983, walked the field, found the egg cases on the underside of the leaves, and told Raymond what everyone told everyone. Spray malathion. 2 applications. Once at egg hatch, once 2 weeks later. Pruitt wrote the rate on a card. Left it on the truck seat. He was not wrong, exactly. The chemical did what it claimed. Pruitt had recommended it to 40 growers, and 40 growers had sprayed, and most of them would spray again the next year and the year after. That was the part Raymond kept turning over. Not that it didn't work. That it never ended. Raymond read the card. Then he read the price. The chemical and the custom application came to roughly $9 an acre. Across 320 acres, $2,880 every year. Forever, for a beetle that would be back next spring no matter how much he sprayed. He put the card in the glove box, bought ducks instead. The logic was not something Raymond had invented out of nothing. He'd read about it. A farm magazine, the winter before, had run a short piece on rice growers in Japan who ran ducks through their paddies. The ducks ate the insects and the weed seedlings and the snails. left the rice alone. Their droppings fed the crop. The article was half a page. Raymond had torn it out and kept it in the kitchen drawer for 4 months, looking at it, thinking it through. Wheat was not rice. He knew that. Rice grew in flooded paddies, and ducks loved water, and the whole system fit together. Wheat grew on dry ground in the Tosha Valley hills. But the principle was the same. The beetle lived in the field. Ducks ate beetles. Nobody had told him it couldn't work on wheat because nobody had tried. He tried. The first week was a failure. The ducklings were too small. They huddled at the field edge and would not range into the wheat. A hawk took 2 of them the second day. Raymond came out at dawn and found feathers and a problem he hadn't planned for. He built a temporary fence of welded wire, 4 feet high, around a 10-acre block. Moved the ducks inside it. Strung fishing line across the top in a grid to spook the hawks. It cost him a Saturday and $60 in wire and posts. The brooding was its own lesson. Day-old ducklings can't go straight to a cold April field. Raymond kept the first batch in the barn 3 weeks under a heat lamp, on straw, in a stock tank he'd lined with cardboard. He learned what every duckman learns. They are filthy. They tip their water. They turn dry straw to muck in a day. He cleaned the tank twice a day and lost no more after the first 2. By the time they feathered enough to hold their body heat, they were ready for grass. He also learned they imprinted. The ducklings followed him. When he walked the field edge, they came in a line behind his boots. That turned out to matter. A duck that follows a man is a duck that can be moved. Raymond used it, walked the lead birds where he wanted the flock to graze, and the rest came after. No herding, no dog. Just a bucket of cracked grain and 40 ducks that thought he was their mother. The ducks stayed. And by the second week in the field, they grew. By early May, the ducklings had feathered out and found their legs. Raymond watched them work the wheat in the mornings. They moved in a loose line, heads down, dabbling along the rows. He pulled a duck off the field one afternoon and looked in its bill. Beetle larvae. 3 of them, half digested. He set the duck down and watched it go right back to work. He took to walking the field at first light, before the heat, when the ducks were hungriest and the dew still hung on the wheat. The beetle larvae were slow in the cool of the morning, easy for a duck to take, and the ducks knew it. They worked the undersides of the leaves where the larvae fed. A duck would run its bill up a wheat blade and strip it clean and move to the next. 40 of them across 10 acres made a sound like soft rain, the constant small clatter of bills working the crop. Raymond stood at the fence and listened to it. It was the sound of $2,000 a year he was not going to spend. The ducks ignored the wheat itself. That was the thing the doubters couldn't credit. A duck in green wheat will eat the bug and the weed and leave the crop standing, because young wheat is grass, and a duck after protein wants the insect, not the blade. They nipped a little, trampled a little in their lanes. But they did not graze the wheat down, and Raymond had the standing crop to prove it, greener by the week. The neighbors had a different read on it. Word had gone around the Touche Grange that Toller had turned poultry loose in a wheat crop. Dale Aldis, who farmed the section to the north, drove the fence road slow one evening to see it for himself. Didn't get out of the truck. Carl Stamper said at the feed store that ducks would trample more wheat than any beetle ever ate. Said it loud enough to be repeated. It was repeated. There was talk that Toller had finally gone soft. 61 years old, no son to take over, farming the way his neighbors saw it had been good enough for 30 years. A man with a beetle problem sprayed it. That was what you did. The ones who thought about it at all decided Raymond had read one too many magazines. A few thought he'd lose the 10-acre block entirely and learn his lesson. Stamper offered at the co-op counter to buy Toller's duck dinner come fall. Got a laugh for it. Raymond heard about it the way a man hears about such things, secondhand, at the co-op, from someone who pretended not to have been there. He didn't answer it. Went home and counted ducks. 40 of the 42 were still alive. He counted beetles too. Or tried to. Walked 20 plants in the duck block and 20 in a block with no ducks. The no-duck plants averaged 6 larvae each. The duck block plants averaged less than 1. He wrote both numbers in a notebook. Did not show anyone. The trampling worry was real, though. Raymond watched for it. A duck weighs less than 4 pounds. It walks on webbed feet that spread the load. It does not have a cow's hoof or a man's boot. Across 6 weeks of watching, Raymond found the ducks pressed the wheat down in their lanes, but the wheat sprang back. Tillering wheat is tough. It bends. The lodging he'd feared never came. What did come, by the middle of May, was a duck block that was visibly greener than the rest of the field. He tested it the only way he knew. He left a strip down the middle of the duck block with no birds on it, fenced off, a control. Same soil, same seed, same weather. The only difference was the ducks. By late May, the duck-grazed wheat stood darker and thicker than the strip. The strip carried the beetle silvering. The grazed wheat did not. A man could see the line between them from the road. Raymond saw it every morning and still did not quite believe his own field until he had the leaves under glass. He didn't trust his eyes on it. So he measured. Raymond clipped flag leaves from both blocks and counted the feeding scars under a magnifying glass at the kitchen table. The unprotected wheat showed heavy damage. The silvering, the skeletal blades. The duck block wheat showed almost none. Margaret, his wife, sat across from him while he counted, and after the third night of it she stopped asking when he was coming to bed. The ducks were eating the beetles. The numbers said so. But the beetles were only half of it. The other half was underfoot. 40 ducks ranging a wheat field eat more than insects. They eat weed seedlings, the young broadleaf weeds coming up between the rows, the wild oats and the mustard and the pigweed that Raymond would otherwise have to deal with by cultivation or chemical. The ducks ate them small before they could set seed, and everywhere the ducks went, they left droppings. Duck manure runs about 0.6% nitrogen. Fresh, it is mild, spread thin, dropped continuously across the field rather than dumped in one place. 40 ducks foraging 12 hours a day deposit a steady trickle of nitrogen and phosphorus right onto the root zone. Raymond did not have a way to measure that, not exactly. But he knew his soil. And he knew that nothing was being hauled in or sprayed on. The ducks were eating the field's pests and feeding the field at the same time. The only input was the grain he tossed them at night to keep them tame and coming home. That grain was wheat, too. Cracked, from his own bin. Cost him next to nothing. There was a thing the books would later call a closed loop, though Raymond never used the word. The wheat grew the beetle. The beetle fed the duck. The duck fed the wheat. The wheat fed the duck again at night, from his own bin, and the whole circle ran on sunlight and rain and 40 birds that thought he was their mother. He'd spent 30 years buying nitrogen in a bag and beetle control in a jug, hauling both onto a field that, it turned out, could grow most of what it needed if he let it. The realization did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way most true things did for Raymond. Slowly, at the kitchen table, in pencil. He moved the fence as the season went. The welded wire panels were light enough for one man to walk along the field, 10 acres at a time. Raymond grazed the ducks across the wheat in a slow rotation, 2 weeks to a block, the way the Japanese piece had described moving birds through paddies. He kept a rough map in the notebook. Which block, which dates, how many beetles before and after. The rotation mattered more than he'd guessed. 2 weeks was long enough to clean a block of beetles and weeds, and short enough that the ducks never beat the wheat down or fouled one patch of ground. By the time the wheat headed out in June and the ducks could damage the grain, he pulled them off entirely, put them on a pond and a fenced lot near the barn. The beetles, by then, were finished. So were the spring weeds. The harvest came in late July. Raymond cut the field with the same combine he'd run for 11 years. The yield monitor in 1983 was a man with a notebook and a weigh ticket from the elevator. The numbers came back over 3 days of hauling. The wheat averaged 71 bushels an acre. The year before, sprayed and beetle-bitten both, he'd cut 58. 3 years before, when the beetle first came and he'd done nothing, 51. The duck field cut 71. 13 bushels an acre over the best year he'd managed with the sprayer. Across 320 acres, that was better than 4,000 extra bushels. At the 1983 price, somewhere near $14,000 more than the sprayed year would have brought. The duck strip and the control strip told the cleanest story. Where the ducks had grazed, the wheat ran better than 70 bushels. The fenced-off control strip in the middle, same everything but birds, cut 56. 14 bushels of difference inside one field, inside one season, with the weather held even. Raymond had built himself the experiment without quite meaning to. The number was not a feeling. It was a weigh ticket. And he hadn't spent the $2,880 on chemical. Raymond did the arithmetic at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd counted beetles. The ducks had cost him 77 cents to buy, $60 in fence wire, and a few bushels of his own cracked grain to feed. Call it under $200, all of it, the first year. Against $2,880 saved and $14,000 gained. He checked the figures twice. Then he checked them a third time, because numbers like that made a careful man suspicious. The numbers held. There was one more line in the ledger he hadn't counted on. The ducks themselves. 40 khaki Campbells, fed mostly on beetles and weeds and a little cracked wheat, were full-grown birds worth money by fall. Some he kept for breeding, some went for meat. A dozen laying hens among them gave eggs through the next spring. The pest control had paid for itself 10 times over, and then handed him a second crop on top of it. A crop that had spent the summer working for free. Dale Aldous came over in August. Drove in this time, got out of the truck. Said he'd heard Toller's field cut better than anyone's on the valley floor. Asked, not quite directly, how the ducks had worked out. Raymond walked him to the lot and showed him the birds. 40 of them, fat and full-grown now, worth something on their own as meat in the fall. Aldous looked at them a long while, asked where a man might buy ducklings. Raymond told him Pendleton. $1.85 a head. Aldous bought 60 the next spring. Gerald Pruitt, the extension agent, heard about the yield too. The county tracked elevator deliveries. Pruitt knew exactly what Toller's field had done. He came out in September after harvest and stood at the edge of the stubble. He didn't mention the spray card he'd left on the truck seat in March. Asked Raymond to walk him through the whole thing. The fence, the rotation, the numbers from the notebook. Pruitt wrote it all down. Asked if he could bring it up at a growers' meeting that winter. Raymond said he could. Asked that his name be left out of it. Pruitt stood at the stubble a while after the notebook was closed. He'd spent 9 years telling growers to spray, and the spraying was sound advice, and he'd believed it. Now he was looking at the best wheat in the valley, and it had never seen a drop of chemical. He didn't say any of that. Asked one more question, about the stocking rate and wrote the answer down. Then he shook Raymond's hand, which he had not done in March, and drove off. Pruitt left the name out. But the method went into a county circular the following year. Integrated pest management with foraging waterfowl. 2 pages, with a diagram of a movable fence and a stocking rate. It read like an engineer had written it. It described, in careful language, what an old man had worked out from half a magazine page and a notebook full of beetle counts. The beetle came back every spring, the way Raymond had known it would. It always would. But the ducks came back every spring too. Raymond ran ducks through his wheat from 1983 until he stopped farming. He raised the count to 120 birds by 1986, enough to work the whole crop in rotation. He never sprayed malathion again. The cereal leaf beetle never took more than a few % of his yield again either. The two things, the duck and the beetle, settled into a balance that held. The balance was the part that surprised the county. The sprayed fields ran a cycle. Heavy beetle, hard spray, dead field, heavy beetle again. Raymond's field never spiked and never crashed. By keeping ducks on it every spring, he kept the beetle population low enough that it never built to the silvering stage at all. There was no eradication. There was no war. There was a duck eating a beetle every few seconds, all spring. Every spring. And a beetle count that sat low year after year without a drop of chemical. Pruitt called it suppression in the circular. Raymond called it 40 ducks doing their job. Other growers picked it up slowly, the way real things spread in farm country. Not from the circular. From the fence line. From a man watching his neighbor's field come in greener and asking, finally, how? By the late 80s there were maybe a dozen duck and wheat operations in the Touché Valley. None of them advertised it. It just worked, quietly, every spring, the birds doing what the sprayer used to do, for free, while feeding the ground. Carl Stamper, who had offered to buy Toller's duck dinner at the co-op counter, ran 100 birds through his own wheat by 1988. Never mentioned the joke again. Raymond never mentioned it either. Didn't need to. The two of them traded ducklings some springs, and that was as close as either came to saying anything about it. Raymond Toller farmed the Touché Valley until 1997, sold the 320 acres to a younger grower from Dayton who had grown up hearing about the duck field 2 sections over and wanted that exact ground because of it. The young man kept the ponds, kept the movable fence panels stacked in the equipment shed where Raymond had left them. Found the notebook, too. The one with the beetle counts in pencil. 20 plants here, 20 plants there. Every spring back to 1983. He still runs ducks through the wheat. Raymond drove past the place once in 2004. April, cold gray morning, the kind he'd carried the first crate out in. The wheat was up, 6 inches of green, and a line of ducks moved through it with their heads down, working the rows the way his first 42 had worked them 21 years before. He didn't stop. Didn't need to. They had laughed when he let the ducks into the wheat. The ducks never minded the laughing. They just kept eating. And the field kept growing.